Sleepless with Charley.
Hello everyone, and welcome all to the third installment of Sleepless with Charley, a soft-spoken ASMR-style podcast where I brave the deepest, darkest, spookiest corners of the internet, mostly Reddit, and I find the creepiest stories that the internet has to offer, and I read them to you to help you sleep. If you're the type of person that finds yourself scrolling on Reddit before bedtime, or if you just enjoy the spookier things in life, then this might be the podcast for you. Quick reminder that this podcast is available on YouTube. However, if you prefer a more audio-based experience, it's also available on Spotify, iTunes, and Google Podcasts, soon to be available on all other platforms as well. Either way, your continued support means the world to me, and I really appreciate you guys sticking with me while I work on this little passion project of mine. I hope you've all had a wonderful week, and you've been able to maintain a somewhat regular sleep schedule. Personally, I've been struggling with that. There have been several days where I just worked through the night, just completely by accident. I really enjoy editing, honestly, and I get really into that, and sometimes I get a little bit carried away. So this week I'm going to try and do a little bit better and actually go to bed on time. But silver lining, when I go to bed and I'm just having trouble getting to sleep, I can scroll through r/nosleep and find more stories to show you guys. It's really been a nice little thing to look forward to in the day, especially since it's somehow snowy, rainy, and unbearably cold, like -2 degrees here every day. I don't know how it manages to do that, and it's still getting dark at 4, and I don't like it. But things like this give me something to really look forward to, and I really enjoy sharing these stories with you guys. I think I have a really good batch of stories for you guys today, a little bit extra spooky, so buckle in and get ready for this very scary episode. Today's episode is called Replaced, an episode where all the stories have to do with someone or something being replaced. Skinwalkers, clones, evil twins, all of those are pretty common horror tropes, and for very good reason. It's one of the few that actually really gets me, especially when I start to think about it. Like, if your very close loved one was replaced, would you notice it fast enough? What are the replacement's intentions? How do you go about confronting them? Do you confront them? But what would you notice that's off about them? It's so scary to think about, but the wonderful thing about horror is after I'm thinking about what I would do if my twin sister was replaced, then I can go to bed and just realize that none of this is real, everything's gonna be okay, and my sister's probably not a skinwalker. Probably. With that in mind, sit back, lay down, get relaxed. Let's buckle in for today's episode. Our first episode was posted on r/nosleep in October by World Away Tweeting. It's fairly popular with 4.5k upvotes. The story's about a Ouija board and a group of teenagers horribly misusing it, as is their wont. I can definitely relate to that. In college, a group of friends of mine went into the supposedly haunted overpass of our school and used a Ouija board. We summoned a ghost named Jeff, and this was before the Bob's Burgers episode, so when that came out, I felt very seen. This overpass was supposedly haunted because it was just very creepy and out of the way of things. It was built for the football team to use, but a year before the football team was disbanded. Really, I think the only scary thing going on there was the horrible misuse of school funding. However, in this story, things do go a lot more wrong, which we'll see. Buckle in, this first story is called Me and My Friends Are Using a Ouija Board for the First Time. It keeps asking people to leave the room. Here we go. I'm using this post to chronicle the events of this evening, as they have been truly fascinating. Some quick backstory. The small section of the city that me and my friends live in is generally known to be haunted. And even if you're not a believer in the supernatural, it's at least a bit eerie. I'm not going to dox myself by stating the location, but let's just say that creepy sightings and murders/deaths due to unexplainable circumstances are our bread and butter. For most people, this means you move away as soon as you can. For folks like me and my friends who absolutely love all things spine-chilling, It generally makes for a pretty good time. Our Halloween parties are awesome. Most of our drinking nights have some sort of spooky game interlaced into them. And if you have literally nothing to do on a Friday night with your friends, you can always go on a tour of some of our haunted locales. Graveyards, abandoned buildings, creepy forests, you name it. So, with that background established, let's cut back to tonight. Me and my closest 3 pals decided to try our hand at using a Ouija board. Were we going to be normal and try the Ouija board in one of our family attics? Nah, too basic. We instead decided to trek up together to, what I shit you not, is an abandoned treehouse left in an elevated section of our city, surrounded by forests. What could go wrong, right? We climbed up to the treehouse, set down a spooky-themed rug, lit some candles, and brought out the Ouija board. Despite my pretty extensive resume of dealing with all things creepy, I'd never actually tried a Ouija board before, so I was really excited to see what would happen. We went into this excited to break every rule in the book. We weren't going to do a seance, we were going to ask whatever we want, and we didn't need to worry about being respectful to the spirit, etc. We figured if something interesting were to happen, it'd be more likely if we went in carefree as possible. We sat in a circle around the Ouija board and got started, asking the simple question, is there a spirit with us? With all of our hands placed on the planchette. No real response. We fluttered the planchette in a few different directions, but we could tell we were kind of forcing it. We asked a few other questions. What is your name? When did you die? Etc. But nothing really came of it. After trying for the next half hour and not really getting anything in the form of a response, we decided that we probably didn't have any spooky luck tonight, and opted instead to share scary stories in the treehouse. We left the Ouija board out just in case we'd get luckier later in the night. Amidst a break in our storytelling, where everyone was grabbing drinks and snacks from their bags, I decided to give the Ouija board another quick go. I placed my hand on the planchette alone and whispered the following question. Will you please grace us with your presence tonight? Surprisingly, the planchette started moving. It's hard to explain, but you kind of know when something is moving on its own, versus when you sort of subtly and subconsciously move it with your hand to force an answer. This felt real. A tingle went up my spine. It was cool as hell. My hand was moved to the following letters. Y-E-S. Yes. Awesome. I looked over to the group and told them that the Ouija board was working again. Excitedly, we all huddled around and placed our hands on the planchette. I followed up with another question. Where are you from? We sat there excitedly waiting for something. Instead, nothing. The planchette was still. The lack of any external force with us was very, very obvious. Disappointing, but I had an idea I want to follow up with. I turned to my friend Kevin and asked him, do you want to try doing it solo? It worked for me. Kevin was confused, but he decided to give it a try. We all backed up to give him some space with the Ouija board. He placed his hand on the planchette and repeated my question. Where are you from? His expression changed to shock as his hand started moving with the planchette. He turned to all of us and mouthed, I'm not doing this. To which I excitedly mouthed back, I know. I pulled out a notepad and recorded the answer as the planchette went from letter to letter. I recorded the following. Not important. I love it. A spirit with some sass. I asked Kevin to back up for a sec as I approached the Ouija board, prepped for one final, solo question. I asked, why are you only responding when it's one of us using the board? Yet again the planchette moved effortlessly with my hand. It was faster this time, so I said the letters out loud and had another one of my friends, Eleonora, transcribe onto my notepad. The answer was, 1 at a time. Fair enough. I thanked the spirit, my hand still on the planchette. I appreciate your answers, friend. To my surprise, in a strange synergy between me and the spirit, I felt compelled to move the planchette again. It was the fastest it had ever been this time as it covered the following letters. Tell everyone else to leave. My friends looked at me skeptically as I said the letters one at a time. "Are you sure you didn't just force that on purpose?" asked Eleonora. I assured her I definitely didn't. That was definitely from the spirit. At this point, this had been the most supernatural phenomena I'd ever experienced in my life, and I was excited to keep it going. My friends, usually unflinching and made of ice, were a little bit thrown. Eleonora and Martin looked ever so slightly spooked, but Kev was willing to go with it. "Might as well see where this goes," Kev said, as he started climbing down from the treehouse. With a slight bit of hesitation, Eleanor and Martin followed suit. Sweet, an actually creepy night. I embraced the quiet amidst the lighting of the candles and the power of the Ouija board. I geared up for my next question. I wasn't going to hold back. "Spirit, how will I die?" I took in a deep breath, waiting for some movement. Slowly. "Depends." Interesting answer, if not a bit underwhelming. I geared up for my follow-up. "Oh, come on, Spirit. How about something a little bit more specific?" My hand moved with the planchette to the following letters. I tried hard to focus and connect the letters since I didn't have anyone to transcribe with me. "What is your name?" Weird. Completely dodged my question and asked me my name. Okay, all-knowing spirit. I assumed you already know that. I decided to try tricking it. "My name is Belle." Movement from the planchette on the Ouija board. It took me to the letters. "Do not lie." Well played, spirit. I gave the spirit my actual name, Jennifer, and continued to see the follow-up response. "What is your favorite food?" Honoring the spirit's rules, I opted to tell the truth instead of following up with another lie. Your girl loves Donair, and this spirit deserves to know that. The Ouija board's response. Correct. Before I could take in the affirmation from the spirit, who was asking the questions here, spirit, it followed up with yet another question. What is your biggest fear? Do not lie. The question took me back a bit. I wasn't really afraid of anything, or so I thought. I struggled with it. It took me a few moments. I really thought of it. I kind of cringed at the answer, but it was my truth. Something horrible happening to my little brother. No movement from the Ouija board. Seconds turned into minutes as I kept my hand awkwardly placed on the planchette. Then, finally, thank you. Send Eleonora. Welp, I obliged. I thanked the spirit for its time and decided to climb down from the treehouse where my friends were waiting. I passed on the spirit's message, and I told Eleonora it was her turn. Martin, Kev, and I spent what must have been 15 minutes standing outside the treehouse while Eleonora was up there. We'd pulled drinks out of our bags and were discussing my experience with the Ouija board so far. Both were incredibly surprised when I told them that the spirit was asking me the questions. What kind of questions? Generic stuff like my name, favorite food, etc., I answered. Weird. Both Kev and Martin seemed a bit thrown off by it, but I was excited. We looked up at the treehouse as we heard the sounds of someone climbing down. Eleonora had just finished her session. She looked traumatized. How was it? I asked her. Weird. All it did was ask me questions. Questions like, Kev asked her. My name, my favorite hobby, my biggest fear. That one took me a while to answer. Kev turned to me. That is a little bit eerie, he said. I agreed. Doesn't look like Eleonora was loving it either. But still, a spirit asking us questions? This had to be the coolest, if not the coolest, paranormal experience I'd ever experienced in my life. Eleonora turned to Martin. It said that you were up next. Martin's session seemed longer than the others. We stood outside, drinking, talking about the happenings so far, and pulling out the occasional snack. That was a little bit traumatizing, said Eleonora. Kevin pointed to her, then up to the treehouse. Agreed. This is kinda messed up, he said. Yeah, but that's the point, I responded. We seek out spooky happenings all the time and we never get lucky. This is an actual, legit supernatural experience. I feel like we have to take advantage of it. Even if it's asking us personal stuff? What does it want this info for? Followed up Eleonora. I shrugged. While the biggest fear question was pretty weird, I didn't feel too worried that a spirit knew my favorite food or what my name was. Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of someone climbing down from the treehouse. Martin had finished up his session. It felt like it had been 30 minutes, which topped the rest of our sessions. We bombarded Martin with questions as he reached the ground. He looked more shell-shocked than Eleonora did. That was pretty fucked up, he started. What did it ask you? I asked enthusiastically. My biggest fear, Martin responded. It's weird, but it felt like it didn't like my answer to that one. It almost seemed annoyed. Huh. So was it just silent for a while after that? I asked. No. It asked me way more things after that. What the happiest moment of my life was, who I was the most jealous of, what my biggest life dream was, all that stuff. It was a lot of questions. Then, finally, it just wrapped up with thank you, and that was that. Martin turned to Kevin. You're up next. Kevin turned to all of us. Here goes nothing, he sighed and started climbing up to the treehouse. We watched him make his way all the way to the top. For the first time in the evening, I had a knot in my stomach. Only 5 minutes had passed since Kevin first went up, but he was already climbing down. He was shaking his head as he made his way down the ladder into our group. Fuck that, said Kevin. What happened? We asked him. He just shook his head. That shit is dangerous. We need to get the fuck out of here, ASAP. I never seen Kevin like this. He was uncharacteristically shook. You have to tell us more. What did it ask you? What did it say? But Kevin ignored all of our questions. He just started packing up his bag. You guys can play with fire if you want, but I'm out of here. I suggest you guys come too, he said. I watched as Martin and Eleonora started packing up as well. I had bad feelings throughout this whole thing. I think we should leave, said Martin. Guys, what the hell? Just because it's unsettling doesn't mean we have to pack up. We can just hang out up there and do something else, I said back. This doesn't feel right, said Eleonora. I watched them all as they took a few steps away from the treehouse and towards the forest. You coming? Asked Kevin. I stood my ground. Kevin just shook his head and started heading out on his way. Suit yourself. I had no idea what could have possibly happened up there that would have shook him this much. He had already started walking away as Martin and Eleonora pleaded me to come with them. I said no. Begrudgingly, they all left. You're probably wondering, wasn't I scared? Especially now that I was alone? The answer was yes. But something in my soul told me that I was up next. I'd spent my whole life waiting for something that was truly supernatural to happen, and now it was in front of me. With my fingers jittering, I climbed up to the treehouse as my friends departed. It took me a moment to pull together the bravery to put my hand on the planchette. The candles were still lit. The setting was just right. Finally, I spoke to the spirit again. Why are you asking us all these questions? Nothing for a few minutes. Then my hand moved with the planchette, slower than usual. The answer? To confirm my suspicions. Confirm your suspicions of what? Movement from the planchette on the Ouija board. One of you is not who you say you are. What are you talking about? I heard blood-curdling shrieks coming from the forest outside the treehouse, like nothing I'd ever heard before. What the fuck? The planchette was moving on its own now. I watched it go from letter to letter. That is not Kevin. He is coming back for you. Run. And so I did. The small section of the city I live in is generally known to be haunted. I think I know why. It's time for me to leave. What the fuck is Kevin? Oh my god. That one really got me when I read it. Something about just saying run just really gets me. Like that Godzilla NES creepypasta, which I will read at some point. I do plan on doing like a classic creepypasta episode. That just... Ooh. What was Kevin? On one hand, leaving it vague is kind of like, you can get your mind going. It's a very good writing tactic, but on the other hand, I'm nosy and I need to know, what is Kevin? Oh, very excellent. Great work, World Away from Tweenie. That one got me. This next story is a little bit of a different type of replacement, but it's a replacement nonetheless. It's a little bit more sci-fi than the other stories I've read on here, and I really love it for that, but it's not high sci-fi, it's not Star Wars, it's much more grounded, which just makes it even creepier. So I'll let you see for yourself what I mean without getting into too many spoilers. It was posted on r/nosleep about 2 weeks ago with 3.5k upvotes. It was posted by Happy Cats for a Sad Girl. I have those, 2 of them. Their names are Finnegan and Marceline, and I would commit arson for them. I love them so much. Alright, this story is called I'm an X-ray tech, and one of my patients is missing his skeleton. So, just drawing you right in. Let's get started. The sound was loud in the small room, but after a pause, she made it again. What do you reckon, Carol? I prompted, turning away from the X-ray result back to my supervisor's pensive face. Another pause. The patient isn't in any pain? Any symptoms? Not really. He came in for a suspected fracture from training, but hadn't felt anything before that. Nothing out of the ordinary. Carol was lit only by the X-ray screen, the blue light making deep shadows out of her fine wrinkles. Her jaw moved slightly as she processed. Run the procedure again. Calibrate the machine properly. Make sure... All done, Carol. We've scanned him as many times as we safely can. Everyone calibrated the machine. Hell, I X-rayed myself to check. It's all fine. I wasn't used to interrupting a consultant like that, but my heart was racing from what I was seeing. More sharply than I meant to, I indicated the heaps of films that showed a full and healthy skeleton picked out in textbook sharp detail from myself, compared horrifyingly to those from the patient sitting quietly next door. For a few minutes, Carol examined each one, her hmms turning to grinding of teeth. This is completely impossible, she muttered finally, more to herself than me. There's no doubt. We checked a dozen. He's got no fucking bones, Jack. I jumped, as much from her swearing as the sudden volume in the enclosed space. A silence fell as we both composed ourselves, the humming of the X-ray screen the only sound. On that screen was a film showing a translucent human outline, very normal for X-rays. But instead of the bright lines of bone, there was just nothing. A faint mark, ghosts of something where the bones should be, but the skeleton itself was simply missing. Slowly, Carol collected herself. Okay, talk me through it. Physical examination? There's something there, solid, feels a bit. I shuddered at the memory of touching the patient, how his tibia seemed to squirm under my fingers. Wrong. So there's something in there keeping him standing. Follow-up tests, vitals. The next few minutes were spent running through heart rate, blood pressure, and other metrics that painted the picture of a perfectly healthy young man who was simply missing his bones. Finally, I explained the next steps. I've got a blood sample here which I'll take to labs. Hopefully that will tell us something. I patted the sealed vial in my breast pocket, and I'm waiting on the CT machine to free up next door so we can get a better look at his soft tissues. We wanted your input after that. My bleep went off just as I finished talking, letting me know that the scanner was ready. Carol ground her teeth again. I'm following this. You have my support. I led her through to the waiting room where our patient sat staring idly at the posters opposite. He was a wiry young man, with slightly thinning brown hair, and casual clothing like a lot of the staff. As we entered, he looked up with a concerned expression, no doubt wondering why so much attention was being given to a minor fracture. But Carol simply introduced herself and asked if she could take some observations, which the man hesitantly agreed to. It was left to me to explain that we'd found a small anomaly, that there was nothing to worry about, but we just needed to confirm a few things before we sent him back to the lab, and would he please consent to a quick CT scan? Carol counted his pulse and felt his arm as he gave another reluctant agreement, and once she was done we walked him to the other room and got him ready for the scan. The control room was next door, separated by a pane of glass and an intercom. Once we settled, I turned to Carol as the machine warmed up. "So, what's your expert opinion?" I asked, no irony in the question. "There's something there of clinical significance," my consultant said guardedly. "I'm very interested in these results." I activated the scanner, and the patient began to slide through the humming plastic ring. "You being super formal is worse than your swearing, you know." The minutes ground past, my heart beating faster with each one. The patient asked a few questions during the process, if it was safe, if there was anything to worry about, but I reassured him over the intercom and reminded him to stay as still as possible. When he asked what we were doing, I explained that a CT would give us a better view of soft tissues, muscles and organs and such. Just to check if the fracture had damaged anything, I added, nothing to concern him. Finally, it was done. Barely breathing, I pulled up the results on the screen as Carol craned forward. "What the fuck?" she breathed. I zoomed in with shaking hands, not believing what I was seeing myself. Carol just kept repeating the word to herself over and over again as her eyes devoured the horror on screen. Fuck, 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 fuck. I panned over the image, but they were everywhere. Everywhere that was meant to have bone had been replaced by quarantine. I looked up at Carol, but she said it again, louder and more firmly. "Quarantine, right now. Lock the doors, we need security." "Okay, I'll go to..." "No, here too, you and me. We've touched the patient." She walked over and locked the operation room door, pulling out her phone and dialing a number at the same time. "The door, Jack. Now." My skin began itching at her words, pins and needles and a deep, sickening, crawling sensation. Us too? Quarantine? Contaminated with those? My hand was obeying my superior, though, hitting the button to lock the door of the CT room. The patient's head snapped up at the sound, looking first at the door and then through the window at us. He was starting to panic now. "Just a precaution, sir. There's nothing to worry about." My voice was thin, high on the intercom, unconvincing. I didn't care, though. My eyes were fixed on the results screen, on what the CT scan had revealed. Insects. Thousands of them. Densely packed together, columns running through the patient's body, their carapaces picked out in blinding white on the screen, bodies locked together by spindly legs, needle-thin antennae pointing out from the masses. The X-rays had passed right through them, but the CT scan revealed them in sickening detail. The terrible things made shapes, and with horror, I realized they had taken the place of his bones, the radius, ulnar, femur, even the goddamn skull remade from a mosaic of insect bodies, each smaller than a grain of rice. I felt dizzy. I'd felt them moving. Carol was speaking to someone, and the patient's voice was coming in tinny over the intercom, but I wasn't listening. A cold, trickling feeling was spreading throughout my body, and my mind was going faint. All at once, I threw up, missing the bin completely, but managing to at least get the floor and not the equipment. I collapsed hard on the ground. The pungent smell of bile filled the room, adding to the sensory maelstrom. For a moment, I felt myself being lifted, and I turned to see Carol helping back into the chair. "Stay still and breathe deeply," she instructed. "Water is on the way, so spit for the moment if you need to." She stood and said something to the patient before turning off the intercom and results screen, leaving only the light from the CT room to fill our little space. It helped a little, but the images were still burned into my mind. Finally, she knelt in front of me, careful to avoid the vomit, and held my arms as she talked me through breathing exercise. Slowly, I came back to myself, the panic receding. "Sorry," I muttered. "I don't like bugs." "I'm not a fan myself, especially not those ones," she said kindly. "Your bones don't feel like them, if that helps, just a few minor cuts." She indicated my arms and a spot of blood on my chest. Before I could reply, Carol's phone rang and she stood to answer it. I shivered and did my best to fight off the feeling of phantom itching from inside my body. "Understood. We won't attempt to leave." "You don't need to keep saying it, Sue. I know what lethal force is." "Water, cleaning supplies too, if possible." "Yep." "Okay, bye." She let out a shaky breath as she hung up, looking over to me. "We're under instruction to stay in place. These 2 rooms are now considered a quarantine zone. Apparently, they've seen something like this before, but it's not a good prognosis. If you have it, well, it's like rabies." Another shaky breath. "Once they're in, there's no way to stop them." I felt sick again, but swallowed it down. Questions whirled through my head. They knew these things existed? Is this part of what our facility is studying? What happened to the first patients? Why can't they stop it? Why does my skin itch? Did they really say lethal Before I could voice any of the torrent in my mind, I was jolted by a bang right next to my head. Our patient had come to the joining room and smacked his hand into it, desperate to get our attention. Without the intercom, we couldn't hear any words, but he seemed to be shouting. "Jesus," Carol muttered, clearly also startled. She took one look at my face. "You stay there. I'll do my best to reassure our patient." Both reassure and our patient seemed to ring slightly hollow in our current situation, but I didn't protest. Carol spent a few minutes doing her best to talk the patient down before giving up and sitting down next to me. As she did, the patient began thumping the diving window again. "He's not happy, but there's nothing we can do," she explained grimly. "Some symptoms are setting in: pain, panic, nausea. I didn't tell him what was wrong, though. I couldn't face it. In all my time working with Carol, I'd never seen my consultant look so dejected. As gruff as she was, she'd been a bulwark against all the mess and nastiness of working here, shouldering both responsibility of our patients as well as what we did. "This isn't our fault, Carol. We did the best we could," I tried. "Maybe we could still help him." She responded. "I mean it. Tests or something. Maybe we can fix whatever those bastards upstairs did to him." This caught her attention. Slowly she looked up, meeting my eyes. All kindness and camaraderie was gone. Instead, there was now a look of steel, hard contempt etched onto her face. "Jack, you know what we do here. This is our fault. Those bastards are us. We did this to him." "No," I said, my voice thin again. "No, we're radiology. We just scan the patients, look after them. We don't—" "Do you honestly believe that?" she asked sharply. "You think you're not a part of this? Too small of a cog in this place to be noticed." That you're not responsible. A naive little rad tech that doesn't have any blood on his hands. That's not... At least he can admit he makes weapons. At least I and the patient and everyone else in this godforsaken place can look ourselves in the mirror and know what we're really doing. "Carol, I didn't..." She was angry, angrier than I'd ever seen her. "Look that poor bastard in the eye and tell him we don't make bioweapons. Look at him through the glass and tell him that you're innocent." I felt sick again. Her eyes were cutting through me, pinning me like needles under my flesh. Next to us, the banging on the joining window continued, and I imagined I could hear him howling, but I didn't look. "Can you even tell me his name, Jack? I haven't heard you address him by it." Again, I couldn't answer. Couldn't bring myself to look up at the patient and his screams. Carol made a noise of disgust. "I get it, like a farmer with cattle. It's easier if you don't get attached, right?" She walked away towards one of the computer terminals. "I'm going to write this shit show up, as well as a recommendation that we review your fitness to practice. I'm not happy having someone of your disposition under me in this facility." She looked at me again. "If you want any chance of keeping your job, I recommend that you look your patient in the eye and come to terms with who you are and what you do." The banging had stopped. Shamefully, I turned to look at the body of my patient. Except he wasn't dead. My heart stopped. In front of the window stood a melting man. His limbs were distending, lengthening and distorting as I looked, skin stretching and bubbling. The spine deformed, bending him forwards horribly toward the glass as his jaw flopped open and his skull collapsed on one side. The stretching skin began to split, white shapes pouring free from the gashes, but now I could barely make it out through a film of tears. I heard myself scream, collapsing down at the same time that the bastard's legs gave way, and he fell mercifully out of view. I don't know how long I sat there sobbing for. Eventually, Carol's voice came from above me. "This is what we do here, Jack, and you need to be okay with it. For now, I need the sample vial you took from Mr. Schwann. You are not fit to keep it safe right now." Shakily, I reached into my chest pocket, obeying without question. Immediately, there was a sharp, burning pain, and I pulled my hand out with a yelp. A half-inch cut wept blood along my index finger. In horror, I looked inside, only to see the glint of a shattered sample vial wink up at me, right where I'd landed on it. Terrified, I looked up into Carol's face, which had drained of color. "Right," she said. Okay. I'm going to ask what the transmission vectors of this particular project are. You stay still and over there. Let me know if you feel anything." I simply nodded, unable to speak, trying desperately to ignore the itching coming from deep within my right arm that was slowly spreading upwards. I would say that's karma for working in a bioweapons facility, but in this economy, you kind of take what you can get, so if this job was paying the bills, I get it, even if you do end up being full of bugs. Love the nice little bit of body horror at the end there. Great job. Happy cats for a sad girl. Excellent story, and I look forward to seeing more from you. This last story is in 2 parts. I actually read it when it first came out, and I really enjoyed it. I did not realize there was a second part until I was looking at the top of this year tab, and I found this story. I decided to reread it for this podcast, and then it said on the bottom that there's a second part, so very exciting, great stuff. Unfortunately, the second part does not really conclude the story, so really hoping for a third, and if there is, I'll be sure to read it on this podcast. This story was posted about 10 months ago, the first part was. It has 17.1k upvotes, so very popular. I did say it was on the top of this year, so quite a few people have read this, but I enjoy it a lot. It's very popular for a reason. It is by the user writing-with-L, like the letter L. Again, I'll be posting credits for all these stories in the description, so if you're not sure how to type somebody's username, just check there. This story is called "My Missing Husband Came Home, but I Just Know It Isn't Him." Let's get started. My husband went missing 6 months ago. Just went out to work one day and never came home. It was a horrible shock to the whole neighborhood, because things like that just didn't happen in our little slice of white picket fence suburbia. The police launched an investigation, and the neighborhood watch sent out search parties, but no one ever found any evidence to indicate what had happened to him. Our families were devastated. Recently, the missing posters had been taken away or papered over. The updates from the police became less frequent and dwindled away. I accepted that, hard as it was to admit, my Rick wasn't coming back. Until he did. A week ago, I was in the back garden, watering my petunias when I heard the garden gate creak open. I jerked my head in that direction, and there he was. Exactly the same as he was the day he disappeared. Same windswept blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Same curl to his pink lips. I was in shock. Our families had mourned for him, and yet there he was, standing in our garden like he had just popped out for milk or something. When I asked where he'd been, he said he didn't know. He couldn't remember anything about the last 6 months. All our friends and family are beside themselves with joy. They almost can't believe it. But that's just the thing. I don't believe it. Look, I understand how crazy this all sounds, I do. Our families would never believe me, and I can't go to the police unless I want to end up in a straitjacket. But I just know that the man sleeping next to me isn't my husband. I don't know what to do. I know I should be happy, but I'm not. I'm terrified. I don't know much about anything supernatural or paranormal. I don't even like watching horror movies. But something about this whole situation just makes my skin crawl. Just let me explain to you why I'm so sure. Once I've done that, hopefully one of you will believe me and you'll be able to tell me what to do. The morning after Rick came home, I made him a cup of tea. When I handed it to him, he gave me the brightest smile. Then he took a sugar cube from the dish on the table and dropped it into the cup. Our house was in chaos with his return, and I was still in shock, so I didn't think much of it at the time, but it's been replaying in my mind ever since. I know it doesn't sound very significant, but my husband never put sugar in his tea. He was always adamant that it ruined the taste, and he'd get so frustrated if I ever put sugar in his cup by accident. And yet, this man had sugar. Then it was golf. A few days ago, when he was out visiting his mom, I recorded a golf tournament that was showing on the TV. It was one of Rick's favorite golfers that was competing, and he never missed it. Once he even skipped out on an anniversary dinner just to watch the championship. Only when he came home from his parents and I told him what I'd done, he just seemed unbothered. Like, he said thanks and everything, and then he asked if I wanted to go get dinner. He didn't even watch it, and that's just so out of character for him. Then one night I wake up around 2 a.m. to see Rick's face, inches from mine, just looking at me with those blank eyes. I kind of gave this nervous laugh and asked, "Baby, what are you doing?" And he didn't answer. For like a solid 30 seconds. He just stared, almost like he was looking right through me. Then he suddenly smiled and said, "Sorry, honey. Sometimes I just can't believe this is real." Then he rolled over and went to sleep. I didn't get much sleep after that myself. Yesterday, about a week after he came home, the neighborhood threw a street party to celebrate his return. Everyone from our street and the streets on either side turned up to see him and tell him how happy they are that he's all right. When he wasn't standing with his arm around my waist, he was milling around chatting amicably to each and every one of our neighbors, even the little kids. Jackson, our next-door neighbor Sally's toddler, wanted to play peekaboo, and Rick happily played along with a smile on his face. Now, my husband never did that. Rick always said he didn't like kids. That's why we never had any, and so he never wanted to play with any of the neighborhood children. Especially not Jackson. Rick all but avoided him. Before he disappeared, I had started to suspect it was so I wouldn't see them together and noticed the subtle but unmistakable similarities. The final nail in the coffin, proverbially speaking, was Sally. Just this morning she came knocking on our door. Her excuse was a tray of brownies she carried, but I think she just wanted to push her way into our morning so that she could see for herself what the situation was. After she left, I called her a nosy busybody. Rick laughed, kissed my head, and agreed with me. That was when I knew for sure that it couldn't really be him. Rick always used to get so mad whenever I insulted Sally, like I didn't have any right to hate her, even though she'd been fucking my husband for years. But today, there was none of that. He didn't even try to defend her. I know what you're thinking. If he was in an accident or something, he might have had some kind of traumatic brain injury that caused him to forget some things about his life, maybe even change his personality. And that's a valid, reasonable explanation. I have no doubt it's what the police would tell me if I reported all this. But you know why I'm dead certain that man isn't my husband? He doesn't have a scar. If he really was Rick, he'd have a scar on the side of his forehead, shaped like the golf club I hit him with. But there's nothing. Not a mark. Honestly, I'm this close to going out tonight and digging up my petunias just to make sure he's still under there. I don't know what I'm sharing a bed with, but it's not my husband. So, what the hell am I gonna do? Part 2. Hi everyone. I want to thank you all so much for your concern and support. Even though I'm not giving out my real name, I obviously took a huge risk by telling anyone this at all, and I'm so grateful you've all tried to be helpful. I'm so sorry for the delay in updating. I've had some things to figure out. So I'll start with what I know. Number 1, my husband is dead. In the end, I decided not to dig up the petunias. It was a rash, unadvisable notion, which I have since abandoned because I realized how much worse things could get if I got caught. I've been smart about the whole thing so far, and I'm not about to throw that all away. It's too big of a risk. I did, however, thoroughly examine the flowers and the earth around them for any sign of disturbance, but I found none. Of course I found none. I don't know what I thought had happened. That my garden was some sort of pet cemetery and my husband had clawed his way back from the beyond? Even to me, of all people, that sounds crazy. No, my husband is dead. In my heart, I know that beyond any shadow of a doubt, which means that whatever is in my kitchen right now is a complete stranger. Number 2, he looks and sounds exactly like Rick. His own parents didn't even notice the difference, for heaven's sake. But he doesn't act like him at all, which tells me again that he is a stranger, that he never knew me before this, and he certainly never knew Rick. He doesn't enjoy the things Rick enjoyed. He doesn't say the sort of things that Rick said. He doesn't complain, doesn't raise his voice, doesn't lie or gaslight or cheat. Frankly, he's a better husband than Rick ever was. Honestly, when I think about it like that, I'm almost tempted to just let it go. I tried to let it go, not to get caught up in worrying, and just accept my new life for what it is. But I find myself unable to let it go. Because even though this man seems ordinary and kind and reasonable, there's one thing that scares me still. For someone to have so confidently taken Rick's place, they would somehow have to be sure themselves that the real Rick would not return to complicate their plans, however innocent or sinister those plans may be. Whoever this man is calling himself Rick, he must surely know that Rick is dead. And if he knows that, I would bet anything that he also knows how. I've gambled with my life and my freedom before, and I don't intend to do so again. A couple of you suggested that Rick might have a twin that, for whatever reason, I never knew about. Or perhaps a doppelganger who saw his chance at a more comfortable life and took it. Either of those stories seemed to be the closest to the realm of possibility, so they were the first theories I set out to confirm or disprove. A DNA test would surely be able to confirm whether this man is my husband's twin or someone completely unrelated. Of course, I was hardly going to tell him about it. At best, he would refuse, and at worst, well, I didn't want to find out. So, about a week after my last post, I ordered 2 separate DNA tests designed for finding one's relatives and ancestors, and had them delivered whilst Rick was at work. Then, a few nights later, I waited until he was asleep. Actually asleep, not half asleep and staring. And I pulled out a few strands of his hair, not enough that it would be noticeable in the morning, but sufficient amount to send away in a little tube to be analyzed. Much to my relief, he didn't wake up. I'm not sure how I would have explained it if he had. I sent the hair away to the DNA test companies, and they told me I'd have to wait a couple weeks to get the results. And in those couple of weeks, things have gotten stranger, shall we say. You see, I've noticed Rick never seems to eat of his own accord. Like, he'll make dinner for us both, but that seems more to do when I mention that I'm hungry than with his own desire to eat. He doesn't snack between meals. He never goes for a glass of water. I don't even think he takes anything with him to work for lunch. There's something else, too. Rick's beard trimmer is still in its box, exactly where he left it 6 months ago, covered in dust and quite obviously unused. And yet, Rick has been home for nearly a month, and his beard doesn't seem to be any longer, even though he used to trim it twice a week. On top of that, the staring has become a frequent occurrence, and not just in the middle of the night. I catch him watching me during the day too, always looking away or laughing it off whenever I notice him doing it. Anyway, I might as well tell you why I'm writing this now, because I can't make heads nor tails of the situation anymore. The DNA tests came back in the mail this afternoon, before Rick came home from work. I opened them quickly, eager to see who was included in the list of relatives, whether there were any names I recognized. Either way would answer my question. Only I don't have an answer. All I have are more questions. Because the first test came back as inconclusive, with a note from the company telling me I had to send them a viable hair sample in order for it to work. I didn't understand that. I'd cut the hair myself after all. And what did they mean by viable? But it was the second test that concerned me the most. Where there should have been information about demographic or regional origin, there was nothing. Only a line of printed black letters spelling out the word unknown. Where there should have been a list of relatives and ancestors, there was no one. Not just no one related to Rick. None. I mean no one. According to the DNA test, this man has no relatives. No family, no ancestors, no biological connections near or distant. That should be impossible, right? How can a person exist without any kind of relation? And how could he come from nowhere? I'm typing this up on the computer to study, with several tabs open on various Google searches as I try to figure out how this could be possible. The DNA test lies on the table behind me, taunting me with the evidence of everything I do not know. And then I hear it, clear as day, coming from the doorway behind me. Rebecca? If I didn't know any better, I'd say my heart stopped. I would know that voice anywhere. I never heard him come in, never even heard the door open. Dimly, in the back of my mind, I recall that our door creaks every time it opens. How could I not have heard it? I turned over my shoulder towards not Rick, a false bright smile on my face. He is not smiling. His face is calm, but there's something hard about the line of his mouth that sets me on edge. What the hell is this? His voice is perfectly level, but something about it makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There's an undertone to his voice that I haven't noticed before now, something low and subtly grating. Even the real Rick never sounded like that. He holds something up, one eyebrow arched. When I see what he's holding, my stomach plummets. The results of the DNA test. Ooh, that last one is so creepy. Again, I feel like I say this all the time when I'm reading skinwalker stories, but what is Rick? What are his intentions? I need to know. Writing with L, if you're listening to this, I would very much appreciate it if you'd write the next part. I am on the edge of my seat, and I'm sure a ton of other people would appreciate it as well, judging by how popular this series is. Anyway, that's all for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope this podcast could get you to sleep or at least help you relax a little. As always, remember that none of this is real. Thankfully, we can wake up in the real world where Ouija boards always lead to a ghost named Jeff, and skinwalkers are hopefully not real, and we can just go about our daily lives knowing that even if life sucks, at least our skeletons are not bugs. So we have that going for us. Alright, I hope you guys have a wonderful week. If you're on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you're on Spotify or any podcast platform, a lovely review would help out a lot. And if you want to give me a follow, feel free to do so. Thank you guys so much for your continued support, and I hope you have an amazing evening and a wonderful week. Bye!